Good evening. My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Rick Snizek, who is the executive editor of the Rhode Island Catholic, the diocesan newspaper. And we want to welcome you back.
Good evening, Richard. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our previous visits, and it's my pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
You know, there's a lot going on in the Catholic Church, as most people who follow the news realize that just before Pope Francis passed away, he designated a auxiliary bishop from Baltimore, Bruce Lewandowski, as the new bishop-designate for Providence. And this is great news. Bishop Lewandowski, bishop-designate, I guess is the proper term, will be installed on May 20th at the cathedral. And maybe, have you met him? Can you tell us anything about the new bishop that'll be here?
Yes, Bishop Lewandowski. I only found out just shortly before he came into the press conference that morning. I waited for him in the sort of the bridgeway between the cathedral residence, where he had been brought in that morning. I believe he came up to Providence the night before and stayed at a hotel, and he came to the press conference. I had a brief interaction with him there, and he came up. He came out with a big smile. He shook my hand. I had already told him I had gotten a call from one of my colleagues, Chris Gunty, down at the Catholic Review in Baltimore. They have sort of a magazine as opposed to a newspaper, and I've known Chris for years, and he said, "You're getting a really good, solid guy." He said, "We're already missing him." He said, the people, the faithful there, are really going to love him. He's really compassionate. He's a good, caring man, and that, you know, he exuded those qualities when he came across that bridgeway. So he went into the press conference. He's very humble man. I don't know if you get to see some of the press conference that day. It's still online if people want to look it up and check it out. But he even shed some tears a few times. He said that he was a crier, and he just got very emotional when talking about things. And he's a redemptorist priest, so he spoke about. I asked a question about that specifically to try to draw some of that out in him, and he talked about how he always wanted to be a poor man, a humble man, and such. And he spoke about Pope Francis, and the one occasion that he had met Pope Francis was before he became ill. He was almost in awe of him, because as a redemptorist, you know, they share some of those humanistic values, and he spoke with him about that, and he said at one point, like, "Pope, do you mind if I give you a hug?" He said, Pope Francis stood up, and he said he gave him a hug and embraced him. So he, you know, encouraged everyone to say a prayer for him at this time. So he is a solid administrator as well. So he's not, you know, just a good man and a friendly and humble man, but he's also worked with having, when parishes have to be closed and tethered together and such, he has been involved in some of those processes as well. So he has traveled the diocese, you know, around, and he's been there 5 years now. So he is a solid administrator as well, by all accounts.
Yeah, when now Archbishop, but then Bishop Henning came, it seemed that his style was to really familiarize himself with the diocesan everything, from the parishes to the schools to the administrators and so forth. And I think that's an important thing, and hopefully Bishop Lewandowski will take the same approach. And you got the sense that he's not going to come in with some heavy-handed plan to close places and...
Right. I think that he will, just like Bishop Henning did, Archbishop Henning now, he was wonderful in that way. He even said that at one of his masses. He said that I traveled to all 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island. He said, "How many Rhode Islanders can say that without having to bring their passport or something?" So he was of that mindset. So Bishop Lewandowski is like that. He seems to enjoy breaking bread with people. He mentioned specifically his love for sweets, and he said that he loves meeting people. He said, especially when there's food involved and sweets and such, and he enjoys like sitting down and sort of commiserating with people. So. I'm hoping to, experience some of that with this weekend. I'm going down to Baltimore to spend a couple of days with him. We were going to have it a little longer than that, but some plans changed here, and he has to make a quick trip up to Providence first before going back down there just to get some preliminary details settled for his installation, because it's coming very quickly.
Yes.
So I'll be going down on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday, he said he'll take me to he's going to Annapolis, in Annapolis, Maryland, and he's having a mass for the Knights of Columbus and then a confirmation that night. Okay. And he said in between he'll show me some things. And then Sunday is his final mass in the diocese there.
Okay.
So those tend to be, very much more bitter than sweet, because people will be very sad. Sure. That's what happened with Bishop Henning on Long Island. They were very sad to see him go. So I expect that to go the same way here.
So when this weekend will be his last official act or mass in Baltimore. Will he come up now and be in residence in Providence?
Not yet. He said he still has a few responsibilities left, a few loose ends to tie up down there, so he'll still be in Baltimore. I think that's why he's coming now instead. So he'll be coming up the end of this week. And then he's driving, too. He'll be driving up and driving back. He's going to be bringing some things up, to store here for now. So he seemed to be a very, very humble man, and I've had calls post press conference that said the same thing, that said the person you saw today at your press conference, they said that's exactly who he has been to us down here. They said he's been very accessible to the press, the Catholic press especially there. He's always been very gracious and is always willing to answer. He called me the other night on the phone. I wasn't even expecting myself at like 7:45 one night, and he had to make the change in the schedule, and he was apologetic about it. He didn't want to at first. Do you mind if we change it? I'm like, Bishop, this comes, certainly, do that. I don't mind at all. I'll rearrange the schedule and do that. But that's the kind of person that he is. He's very considerate.
Being a member of a religious order, I think, gives him a different perspective.
Yes.
Maybe. I mean, that's just what I think. Well, as he said, he wanted to be just a poor servant.
Right.
And now he's
he
elevated.
never expected to even ever become a diocesan bishop. Just growing up and becoming a priest in the order. He had a very simple life. He spent a lot of it in Lima, Ohio, on the west side of the state of Ohio. He grew up on a horse farm. Then he went to school in Connecticut, and then he began from there. But he's always seems to be true to his roots there and in Toledo, Lima, Ohio, and Toledo, Ohio.
Well, you should bring him some Alley's donuts, and maybe over to Iggy's for Doughboys.
Sweet. I think he will absolutely love that.
So let's talk about Pope Francis, who was laid to rest the weekend before we're taping this, of course. The College of Cardinals, as it's called, will be meeting soon to elect a new pope, the successor to the chair of Peter. I don't think a lot of people realize that the Pope is officially the Bishop of Rome.
Yes.
And as in that role, he assumes the chair of Peter as a sign of his pontificate. Can you explain briefly what is involved in selection of a pope?
Well, the cardinals have been gathering in the Vatican, in Rome. They've been coming to Rome since Pope Francis passed. I think most were in attendance for the funeral, and probably all that are going to participate were probably already in place here, or in Rome rather. So they stay at what is known as the Casa Santa Marta, and it's like a dormitory-style hotel that was built on the Vatican grounds. It's just inside. If you're facing St. Peter's and you look to the left, and there's an arch with a bell and the Swiss Guard standing outside, that's the way into it. It's just beyond the papal audience hall that people will go to in inclement weather. They'll walk and go into I think it holds 6,000 in bad weather instead of the Wednesday audiences in St. Peter's Square. And just behind that, and it's right along the wall, and people can see it from outside too. It's a double, it's like a dorm, but a hotel. It's very modest accommodations, and I believe it's like 5 stories, and there are 2 together, and there's a beautiful chapel that was built. And I remember asking Bishop Tobin about this one time, because he went for an ad limina visit, and he brought some pictures back, and it showed the beautiful white and gold marble floor. And I was asking him about the chapel, and he said that being from Pittsburgh, he said it was his understanding that someone he thought from the Pittsburgh area was involved in the construction of that, maybe a financier or something involved in that. And Pope Francis chose to live there instead of in the Apostolic Palace on the right-hand side in St. Peter's Square, where other previous popes had lived. Pope Francis chose to live there. He had a 3-room suite, I believe, on the 2nd floor of the front building, and that's where he went until he died. He went right back. But the cardinals will all stay in there, and that way they don't have to leave Vatican City. They can actually be inside there, and when they go to the Sistine Chapel, it's just a matter of taking a mini bus or something, going around the back of St. Peter's and going into the chapel to do the voting. And when they've been having meetings already, preliminary meetings, and it was just announced today that the conclave will begin on Wednesday, May 7th.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
I think the rules are a cardinal who is 80 years old is anything 80 or above
80 or
cannot
above
vote.
Cannot vote.
But they could be elected
They
pope.
could be elected, and like Cardinal O'Malley in Boston.
Yep. So someone said to me that really only 100 cardinals will actually do the voting, even though there's like probably 230 or so cardinals around the world. Is that
Right.
true?
I think a little more. I think is it 128, I believe, that can actually vote, that have voting rights of the cardinals. I know the figure, but I can't recall it offhand. But it's something like, it's around 120, I believe, that can vote. And I read somewhere that like the magic number is 90 for someone to get that number of votes in order to be elected. That's what will happen in successive ballots. And I think Pope Francis was elected on the 2nd day of the conclave. So the first day, so if it follows suit, I think it's usually in the first couple of days it's happened. If it follows suit, then perhaps by Thursday we would know if we had a pope. But there are a fair number, a large number.
There's no time limit.
Right, no time limit, but there are a large number of people who are considered, electable candidates as pope. I had the good fortune of meeting one of them, Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, when I went to Israel in October of 2023 to cover the opening of the war against Hamas. And I was able to secure, with Bishop Henning's help and the contact in New York that he had, I was able to get an interview with Cardinal Pizzaballa at the Latin Patriarchate, the ancient hallway and walking down, and someone just said, opened a door, and it was a little, very sparsely furnished room. They said, have a seat. He'll be in to see you shortly. And then a few minutes later, he just walked in and closed the door, and it was just he and I sitting in the room.
Wow.
So, and someone came in to bring a tray of tea.
So he spoke English.
He spoke English very well.
Yeah.
Yes, very well. And he had made news just prior to that, because in an interview, without clearing it with anyone, he mentioned that he would be willing to trade himself to Hamas for the hostages, to get the hostages back. And needless to say, and I asked him about that, it didn't go over well with his superiors, because he never spoke about that with anyone. It was sort of an off-the-cuff remark and something he felt strongly about. But I wrote about that and about his desire that a two-state solution for the Palestinians shouldn't be abandoned, and that made news, and that story got picked up around the world and got translated into Italian and ran in Italy and ran in different countries around the world. So I was able to at least to meet one of them anyway, and consider. But he's only 60, so he is probably considered young in the scheme of things because of the duration of time that one would serve. But there are people of all ages there, and Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines is 67, I believe. He's seen as a strong candidate, but then again, you just never know.
Well, there's an old saying that if you go to Rome expecting to be a pope, you're going to come home still called the cardinal.
Right.
The cardinal from the Philippines would be the first Asiatic pope, of course, and I understand that there are 2 from Africa that are considered strong candidates.
And Cardinal Peter Turkson actually handpicked one of our priests from the Diocese of Providence, Father Christopher Maher, he's pastor now at St. Augustine. Father Maher was picked by him to serve on the dicastery for integral human development. So Father Maher served 5 years there, but Cardinal Peter Turkson from Africa, I was able to talk with him by phone earlier on when that happened at the beginning, but that was a few years ago. But we do have that connection to Cardinal Turkson in the Diocese of Providence.
Yeah, a lot of people, when you use the term dicastery, would you explain, well, that's like a department in the Vatican? I mean, a lot of people don't.
Yes, and this one for integral human development, it was about, assessing situations around the world and the conditions people lived in and such. But there are different dicasteries, but it's like a government department.
Right, okay,
yes.
that's what I'm trying to get at, because sometimes we use terms assuming that everybody understands.
Yes.
Because there's.
Exactly, yeah. They do have and I've always wanted to visit this place. I've seen pictures of it, but I've never had a reason to get there. But there's a Secretary of State building in the Vatican behind St. Peter's, and I've always longed to visit that because of its role as a government as well. It's the smallest nation in the world, and that fascinates. It's fascinating to many as well.
The Secretary of State is actually considered to be a candidate for Pope, and he's like many people regard him as the #2 man in the Vatican, although there's no such thing as a vice Pope.
Yeah, he spoke to us at, there was a program that a number of journalists from around the world was invited to take part in last fall, and it was called the Church Up Close program, run by the Pontifical University of Santa Croce in Rome, and he came to speak to us at that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's very serious-minded. He smiled a little bit, but he was much more of a serious, minded candidate. He wouldn't speak anything when people asked questions. He didn't offer anything that was, if anyone was looking to get anything on Pope Francis or anything like that, he didn't want to speak for anyone else. He was very adamant about that.
Yeah.
So he's a very serious guy.
That's his the diplomat coming out in
yes.
Have you seen the movie The Conclave?
I have not yet.
Okay.
I'm sorry to say, but I will before I go.
The interesting thing is, obviously it's based on a novel, but what is really depicted is the isolation that the cardinals will be in once it begins. They are literally sealed in the Sistine Chapel for the votes. And when they're sequestered as they go to the living quarters, they eat there, they sleep there, obviously they communicate there. And someone told me there's a limit, they can vote up to 4 times a day.
I think it's 4 times a day.
But they can do it once. They can do one and say, well, we're not very close, they go back and so there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, politicking that goes on during a conclave.
Yes. So and for the most part, from what I understand, the film is historically accurate as to what happens, but a couple of the roles were conflated. I think the role of the Camerlengo, some functions that they would perform versus the Dean of the College of Cardinals. Mm-hmm. But I think otherwise, though, especially it had has a high-profile cast in it as well. And I saw an interview on the BBC with the author of the book before it became the screenplay, and he said that he really wanted it to be as accurate as possible. Yeah.
It's beautifully photographed. I mean, I know they weren't actually in the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel, but boy, wherever they picked was really impressive. The Diocese of Providence does have young men there at called the American College?
The Pontifical North American College, PNAC, they'll abbreviate it as we have some. And then when they go on, they basically live there, and then they go to one of the schools, like the Angelicum, or one of the schools there within Rome. Otherwise, and we do have one that I was in communication with today. He actually he's a priest. He actually was ordained, Father Joseph Brodeur. And he told me today that he's at the Casa Santa Maria, which is off the grounds of the Pontifical North American College, but he's doing his graduate work. And we got some comment from the seminarians about what it was like for them to be. And he actually celebrated the Mass, the funeral Mass, the Mass of Christian burial for Pope Francis, along with Father Christopher Murphy, who was Bishop Henrican grad, a former rector of the Our Lady of Providence Seminary. He is out there now as a spiritual advisor, a spiritual director at the university, and 2 other priests, Father Marcel Taillon, and someone else was, Father Mark Gaddery from Woonsocket was there, the state chaplain for the Knights of Columbus, and the four of them were able to take part in that. They concelebrated the funeral mass.
Now, I understand that you've made arrangements to go to when the Cardinals meet in college.
Yeah, almost like hot off the presses, literally. I mean, literally last second, like right now. So yeah, I just decided to do it. I'm just going to just pull the trigger and go. I bought my own ticket to go, and I want to be there for I would like to have been there for the funeral, to cover the funeral of Pope Francis and that aspect of this time in Rome and for the Catholic Church. But I'll go for this one. Hopefully, I'll be there when the white smoke comes out, and we'll be properly positioned to get a good photograph. There's a lot of pressure to do these things as well, and going all that way to capture these moments for our readers is very important. So yes, so
you have will you get press credentials? Will you be able to?
Yes, from Sala Stampa, I've already applied for my press credentials from there. Unless you live in Rome, then you get like a more of a permanent one. But these are all like they've accredited 4,000 journalists. Most of those have just temporary accreditation, but it does enable you to get into some of the events. Some of them are by pool, but others you have access to the out to the colonnade. There's a place to stand and take photographs on top above St. Peter's Square from there.
Have you made arrangements where you're going to live? I mean, do you have a place to stay?
I'm looking at a couple of different, but I have to finalize that right now too. First it was the effort, but I have a couple of options, yes.
Okay, good. So you think you'll be able to talk to some of the young men who were there, and the priests also who were there, because this is really a historic time. If you're studying for the priesthood or graduate work, and you're there when the Pope is being elected, I mean, that's something you're going to live with for a long time, and
Oh yes. Oh, even leading up to this, we've spoken with a few of the young men. Nathan Ledoux is one of them. That's a particularly prominent seminarian voice that he often sends photos to Rhode Island Catholic of happenings there at the college and at the Vatican. And we've already spoken to them about what their plans are for the conclave, where they hope to be, and they all hope to be in St. Peter's on that day. So the Pontifical North American is above St. Peter's. You could sort of see down into it. It's on the hill above there. It's almost on a level with the Apostolic Palace in a way. I've seen some pictures that some of them have taken because there was an addition to one of the buildings there. It increased the height, and they could almost see on a level almost into the Apostolic Palace across the way. But it is relatively close by. It's a little bit of a walk down, but they're hoping to be there for that historic time.
Yeah, people don't realize that Vatican City is a small accredited country. That's why they have a Secretary of State. Those that go abroad go with diplomatic credentials.
Yes, yeah, they have white passports.
Yeah,
I've seen
the Pope's Army, of course, is the Swiss Guards with wear the funny little uniforms.
Yeah,
that go
some
back.
of them do, and then some don't. In September, they took us into the barracks, the Swiss Guard barracks, and they had like just rows of submachine guns, in stocks, but some of them wear the more ornate, just like at the White House, the Secret Service. Yeah. Some of them are in uniform, and then some are plainclothes.
Like the Marine Guards outside, an embassy.
Yes.
The ones that's not what they wear for everyday work, and there's some in the back that aren't wearing the dress blues. Yeah. I mean, you see the Swiss Guards standing at the pontiff's casket, on guard. So and they look kind of strange because they go back probably to the Middle Ages. They haven't changed.
I think 500 or 600 years. Yeah. I think and it's still they still have to be of Swiss, and they have to be they have to go in unmarried, and that too, and that. But then I think they can marry afterward, and that too. So. Yeah. Well,
don't get into trouble with them because
most live. No, not good. No, not with the Swiss Guard.
No.
Anyway, but they can be tough. Half of the ones when you see, they were telling us that when you see the Pope going around St. Peter's in the Pope Mobile, and you see people dressed in like black suits, about half of them are Swiss armed Swiss Guards, and the other half are part of his sort of usher staff. They go along with him. Yes.
So let's talk about something else. You have been on a recent trip to Israel.
Yes.
And that's kind of interesting. You went with a group of journalists, and I'm wondering who sponsored the trip?
The Israel Ministry was the Catholic Media Association, which all Catholic media of the U.S. and Canada are part of. They did they gave a list of potential candidates to the Israel Ministry of Tourism of people who might be good for such a journey to help, promote, tourism at this time. I did it once before in 2015. I was invited to. The Israel Ministry of Tourism sponsors it. So they provide the transportation over, they provide your lodging, everything. There's no other costs on you except for things that you might want to buy or lunches or something that's not covered by them. But there's no expectation either that they're given favorable reporting or treatment in the end. There was never, no one's ever asked for that. All they would like to do is just to see the things that we write after the fact, like maybe a link to it that they could share or do something with.
Right.
So
you're writing a series for the Rhode Island
I've been
Catholic.
writing a series. I started off the first one
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago because we had to hold everything up because of all the events with the passing of the Pope. But I wrote a first-person account of what it's like to go there and how I wouldn't be. And this isn't something they asked to do or anything. This is just my own personal feeling. And I've long done this ever since I went in 2015. I've always encouraged people to take advantage of any opportunity you have to go. I know it seems daunting because it's the Middle East. You see things on television and things happening. You're going to get blown up or something's going to happen. I always encourage people to search out your own facts along with everything else. Things do happen. I completely agree. Things, it can be a dangerous place and a dangerous neighborhood, can be, but when you get there and you see that it's a modern, secure country with conveniences like we have, communication is very solid in the country. When things are happening in the South, I wouldn't advocate someone to go like I did to drive down to Ashkelon, which is, I got to a town, Mavkim, which was about 4.5, 5 miles from the Gaza border on day one of the ground invasion. I don't know how I even got that close the first day, but I was able to, and I got there just in time for a Hamas rocket came overhead. But I wouldn't advocate for the uninitiated, like a tourist or a regular traveler, to do anything like that. I would never suggest that. But when I was in Jerusalem, I could have easily, it's easy to do that, to go to see the holy sites, to go to Tel Aviv, which is very much like Miami in a lot of ways. It really is. Tel Aviv is very much like Miami. It's a bunch of skyscrapers, the financial and tech center it is of the country. It's smaller in population than Jerusalem, which doesn't have those things, like the skyscrapers like that, or tall buildings at least. But it's right on the beach, right on the Mediterranean, beautiful weather. Warmer. Jerusalem is about 2,000 feet higher in elevation, so it could be a little cooler there sometimes, and they do get snow sometimes in the winter, like a little bit. But I would never dissuade someone from going to those places, even when it seems, you have to assess it for yourself. And most people, though, the first reaction is, "Oh no, never." And I said, well, if I had said that in 2015 and turned down the opportunity, I probably still wouldn't have gone. And like I wrote, I said, they said something might happen to you, and something did happen to me. I loved it. I loved the travel. I loved meeting new people, and going into, even in Bethlehem, into the West Bank, and Palestinians are very gracious, very friendly people. It's a shame that all of them sort of take on the stigma of what some have done, with what Hamas has done, and what Hezbollah does as well. So it's like everybody has to be punished for that, and it shouldn't be, because like anyone else, and I've had the good fortune to travel in different places and throughout the Middle East, a few different countries, and have seen different places around the world, that people are generally the same. Like, they want to be gainfully employed, they want to take care of their families. I've seen women in burqas and hijabs comforting a crying child just like anyone else would do. So that's not to say that there aren't elements, within the culture who seek to the destruction of Israel without a doubt. I mean, we know that that's true. We saw the evil that happened there. But you can't paint 2 million people in Gaza and another 2 million in the West Bank with the same broad brush. I mean, it's just not. It doesn't apply to everyone.
Well,
most people
tend, yes,
they do.
But people tend to do that. Were you escorted everywhere, or let me put it this way: when you went at the invitation of the Ministry of Tourism,
yes,
were there any restrictions placed on your travel or who you could see or who you could talk to, or were you had an escort all the time, or could you go around independently as a journalist?
Oh, no restrictions whatsoever. We had accompanied. They hired a guide, and he's an independent guide. His name was Moshe. And from what I understand, we really scored gold with him, because in talking with him, he was 76 years old, very active. He almost looked like Indiana Jones. He had the hat, he had the white hat.
Leather jacket?
That he would wear. No, he wore like a
bullwhip on his shoulder.
Almost like he had that sort of mindset about him. I think he had served in the Golani Brigades. He was a tough guy, but very understanding and such. And he was very good with us and extremely knowledgeable. But we had someone from Chicago, from the Israel Ministry of Tourism, that she works in Chicago for, and out of that office. And she accompanied us. She had never been before.
Really?
There were supposed to be 4 at first, and one fell off before the trip started. So there were 3 of us, myself, in addition to myself, there was a young guy from St. Louis, still in college, and he writes for some papers there, and an editor from Dallas, Texas. And so we all just went there. And because of the way that tourism has been down, and the flights really haven't been, restructured the way they were according to the timetables, my flight, I had to fly from Boston, instead of like I had done in the past, on the previous trips I've been there, from Boston to Tel Aviv nonstop on El Al. I had to fly from Boston to Fort Lauderdale on JetBlue, which is a partner of El Al.
Oh.
And then nonstop El Al from Fort Lauderdale to Tel Aviv.
Really?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it was a very long joyride in that, but it's I didn't have to pay for it, so it was good in that way too. So I didn't mind. It was of course a different trip. I'm an adventurer, so I like those things. I follow the map. I'm one of probably the few that follow the airline map on the back of the plane. I like to know where I am. So we're going south
in case
over
the pilot gets lost.
In case I almost feel I have to, because one time in going to Miami, probably almost 30 years ago, we flew down to Miami from Boston to Miami, and I got off the plane. The pilot was talking. It was late at night. It was like 1 a.m. And I said, "Oh, did we fly over Cape Hatteras on the way?" And he said, "Cape Hatteras." He said, "Where's that?" So ever since then, I feel I have to. I don't think he was joking. He wasn't laughing. So no, but I'm sure it was. But
the people don't realize that basically it's the air traffic controllers that are flying the plane. The pilots just set the auto compass and follow the directions until they get close to the airport. And today, even a lot of the landings are. They're just holding on in case something goes wrong, but it's
he said they were vectored for 50 miles off the coast and getting there, but that was very long ago. But this was it was a great trip over. It was very uneventful. El Al pilots are very skilled at handling any. That's why when the war happened, when the war started, I booked right on them immediately, because all the American carriers and the other international carriers fell off, and they didn't fly into Tel Aviv anymore. So that's why I knew I wouldn't have my flight canceled by sticking with El Al. But no restrictions at all on who I could talk to or anything like that. It was intense. There was a lot of moving from place to place, and it was. I did get to speak with people on the street and some of the shopkeepers in some places, and we went to a winery at one point, and he told about how much his business has fallen off. We went to Masada, which is kind of a staple for people traveling because of the history there of what happened, and people with the film back in Peter O'Toole was in it, and he played King Herod, I think, in that. I was reading where the tourism there in 2019 they had 840,000 visitors at Masada, and in 2024 there were only 20,000 that actually made the journey down there. It's about an hour and a half's drive
from Jerusalem.
You go out to the Dead Sea and then along it and down. But it's kind of a shame in that way, because it really is spectacular. You take a cable car about 1,000 feet up to the top of the mesa, which really is sea level. When you think about it, that's really getting back to sea level, because the Dead Sea is really below sea level. It's like 1,300 feet below sea level. And that's right across, and you can see it and see into Jordan. But it's fascinating place to see that. And Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, is only a few minutes drive up from there. And they went from 15,000 tourists this past year compared to almost 500,000 in 2019. So that's a severe drop off.
there's reports that actually the population of Israel has decreased by about 1 million people who were living there and had other there were dual citizens elsewhere. They've gone, they left when the war started. How many times have you been to Israel?
This was my fifth time, but some of them, that's not all about travel. Like one of them, I went in 2022. It was something called the Christian Media Summit, and they invited 150 journalists from around the world. And again, they sponsored that. It was by the government. The government press office, the GPO, and they invited 150 journalists from around the world to go, and then you just had to get yourself there. So you just had to get your airfare there, but everything else was covered, the conference, the hotel, and all of that. And that's where I first became familiar with Gaza and kibbutzim, the plural of kibbutz. In doing that, they took us on a field trip down to they took us to an IDF base close to where Egypt and Gaza and Israel connect, and we saw like a mock-up of a city of Khan Yunis about what would happen if something ever had to something blew up, there was a war, they had to practice and train for that. So they took us to an IDF base first, and then they took us to Kibbutz Nirim, which was right next door. It was a small community of about 450 people right on the border of Gaza and around the Gaza fence, and right next to it was Kibbutz Nir Oz, only just a few hundred feet away, and the kibbutz near Oz lost about 30% of its population that day.
October 7th.
Yes, and Kibbutz Nirim, they were able to fight off some of the terrorists who came across and broke through the fence, but I think 7 people were perished in Kibbutz Nirim, but Kibbutz Nir Oz really took a big hit. But it was my familiarity with that, by having them take us there, the Christian Media Summit, that I developed contacts there, and I had a working knowledge of the area. I knew what a kibbutz was at that point. Having seen it, I saw into Gaza and could see the towers. I actually took a photo with my camera of a Hamas watchtower on the other side of the border. And so when it happened, I had people I could call upon, and that's why I became passionate about covering it, because I had those connections in Kibbutz Nirim, and I was able to interview Hadass Calderon, whose husband and children were taken, and then they got the children back. They were like 11 and 16, about a month or two into it in the first trade of hostages, and her husband, or estranged husband, Ofer, he was just released just a couple of months ago in an exchange.
So when you were among the people, let us say, what is your impression of let's say the Israeli man in the street? What is their impression of what's going on? Are they supportive of the Netanyahu government and the Likud party, especially the extreme right wing, which is Zionist, I guess, if you want to use a term? What is their impression of this? Are they still supporting this whole emphasis on war?
It's very much like the United States, the Israeli politics. It's very polarized. It's extremely polarized. Even when I was there covering on television, there'd be panel shows, just like we see on the cable networks. They'll have a panel of people talking, and there were, invariably people who would just be upset with anyone who wanted to advocate for a trade of the hostages. They wanted to just fight, no matter what. So there are people now. I was there a little over a month and a half ago, when I was in Israel for this last trip, and they had said. Some of the people they have established outside. Some people call Netanyahu for other reasons, because he's under cases for bribery and such, that they call him the crime minister instead of the prime minister. So they're right outside on Balfour Street, where the prime minister lives. There are actually protesters, like on a 24-hour basis, that just take up residence out. They have a tent
Not where
out
they're
there.
all covered in the United States. People don't realize
But they're there, and I remember walking past one of them at night. Our guide, Moshe, took us down that way as we were walking back to our hotel. We weren't far from there. And someone had a rally in the afternoon of sorts on a stage, and the people that were participants had already left, but it was just the tech people taking down the stage who didn't seem to have any affiliation necessarily with the group. And a guy, he sounded like with a New York accent and spoke perfect English. He started swearing at the people there, and he was so angry. I thought he was going to throw something at. He banged something on the fence on the side or outside the Prime Minister's house. The fact that people would dare to advocate for the hostages over just going in and finishing off Hamas. There are a number of people who just, want that as well. They want just to go in and just to have the war. But there are others. It's very fractured. It's very fractured. Then there's the issue of the Haredi, those who are in school and studying the Torah. They don't want to be drafted into the military in any way. Yep. So that's another big issue right now. So Netanyahu, he's really trying to cling to power right now. He had lost some of his ministers before, then one came back, but he is sort of cutting deals to give them a break so they don't have to do that, because there are people who don't want them to have to fight or to go in the IDF. But there are others who contend that if you want to deal with these threats on our doorstep in the north with Hezbollah and the continued threat of Hamas, then you're going to need a robust army, a robust IDF.
But the IDF is made up largely of reservists.
Reservists, yes.
And I understand they get time to go back to their jobs and so forth. And there's a resistance now among some of the reservists. They're not going back to report for duty because they don't want to go back to Gaza.
Right.
That's
yes.
accurate? Okay.
Yes. There are reports of that I've seen as well, yes.
Yeah, and there are also indications that Hezbollah has melded itself back into the Lebanese army because a lot of their leadership was decimated, but now they're reintegrated into the army, not just as an independent group that's really funded by Iran.
Right, so they're going to try to control things, I think, within, if they still hold the ideology. But ever since the death of Nasrallah, that threw everything. When they dropped that 2,000-pound bomb, like just south of Beirut, and blew up that the headquarters, that was a game changer there, and sent a strong message to Iran as well. Although they're still trying with the proxies with the Houthis, they're still sending missiles flying up. I still get the alerts on the phone. Because, oh yes, the Red Alert app. Not so much the smaller rockets like the ones I witnessed with my own eyes, coming up out of, being taken out by Iron Dome, but the real missiles traveling hundreds of miles from Yemen, up to strike into Israel. Because it's unknown if they do come down, where they would strike. Yeah. So because they have much greater accuracy in that too, and they're much faster. They travel. They don't know if they could intercept them or not. So they put up a blanket alert for all of these areas.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that Yemen has been under bombardment from Egypt, really backed by the United States for 10 years, and the Houthis are
and Saudi Arabia too.
Well, Saudi Arabia has been bombing them and using a lot of the munitions that we supply. But these people seem to be very resilient because we're hitting them with everything we have, and they still keep coming back and firing.
Yes, it's true. The United States just launched another strike today, and I think I saw a statistic. I think that maybe 88 people were killed, but I'm not sure if they were warring factions or not. It was something else that was hit. I know we're not saying much about it at this point, but I guess it'll have to bear out. But it's an ongoing problem. It's a real threat, and even to shipping in the Gulf.
Well, one of the issues that should concern us is the fact that the government of Syria has been toppled by a combination of the Turkish coming in, Turkish army, Turkish forces, but also people don't realize that the government is now run by the head of an Al-Qaeda faction.
Yes. And
he and his group were actually trained by the CIA, CIA. Al-Qaeda was responsible for the attacks of 9/11 in this country, and now we've got the Central Intelligence Agency training Al-Qaeda people to overthrow a government in another country. Right. And after that happened, Israel is now moving their forces into Syria.
Yes.
So the question is, what is the end game? And we talked about Benjamin Netanyahu being under some pressure. I understand that recently the head of what they call Shin Bet, which is their FBI, there's been some he's tried to remove that person because
Ronan Barr was the head of Shin Bet, like you said, the head of their FBI, and they were investigating Netanyahu for the office of the prime minister being involved with the government of Qatar. So needless to say, that didn't go over well. So there's been a campaign, it seems, and from what I've read, to discredit Barr. And today, it made news that he was refusing to step down. But today, I saw just before we came on a report that said that he's agreed to step down on June 15th. But he's not recanting any of the allegations he had made against the prime minister. But they were investigating the office for dealings with Qatar.
As far as the West Bank goes, of course, that was created after British rule in Israel or Palestine, whatever you want to refer to it as at that time. The British set aside the West Bank for the Palestinian people. Yes. People don't understand that Bethlehem is on the West Bank.
Yes.
And it's an area of about 5,000, maybe 5,500 square kilometers, I believe.
Yes.
Home to about 4 million Palestinians who now Israel is trying to force them out, like as they forced the people in Gaza to the south and trying to clean up, I call it maybe unkindly, ethnic cleansing. Now they're doing the same thing, it seems, in the West Bank, and they're moving into Syria. Did you get a sense while you were there is there an end game to all of this?
Well, the Israelis are taking over, they took over the top of Mount Hermon. There's actually a ski mountain in Israel. You can actually ski in Israel. There's a mountain called Mount Hermon. I think it's about 10,000 feet in elevation. It's in the very far north, the northeast corner, just about where Lebanon and Syria and Israel combine. And Israel has always had sort of the lower flank of it, and it's been used for that purpose. But now, once the Syrian army vacated it, Israel took over the summit of Mount Hermon. And they've moved into Quneitra, which is a town over. Once you get into the Golan, on this last trip we went into the Golan, and I was talking to Moshe about that. We went to
Moshe being your guide.
Moshe being the guide, and he's very knowledgeable because he was in the Golani brigades, but also he's taken some high-profile clients around. He told one time was at Sonny Perdue, the Secretary of Agriculture. He was his guide, so he's been given some pretty high-profile clients. So I think he has a particular set of skills. Actually, he's really good in a lot of ways. So I think that's why he gets these clients. But we were fortunate to have him. But I was talking about Quneitra, and that's how you can look into, from the top when you're at the top right of Israel in the Golan, which they seized from Syria. It was Syria. It was part of Syria. The part we were standing in was really Syria until 1967. But they were firing down on Israel across the Sea of Galilee from there. So Israel took it over to defend itself, and there was a time when it was going to be ceded back to the government of Syria for peace, but it didn't happen. And then one time Netanyahu had said that a few years ago. He said, well, it's a good thing we didn't, because if not, with Al-Qaeda in Syria, they'd be swimming in the Galilee right now, because the Kinneret is basically a giant lake, like 12 miles long. That's the famous Sea of Galilee that Jesus was out on the boat with. And he... Netanyahu had said that they would be swimming in the Galilee and they'd be that close to them. So they're trying to create and expand a buffer zone inside. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create a buffer zone inside Syria until they get a feel for which direction the government is going in with that too. And I think Israel was even encouraging them to maybe even let Russia come back to the port of, there are two ports along like Tartus and another one, Latakia, where the Russians had bases before. And I think maybe Israel was advocating on their behalf to keep Russia in there when the new regime wanted them out. So as far as I know, they're out still. But I think Israel is trying to create what they feel is a sense of stability there, but they don't know. But they're actually, I do look at that too with a wary eye, because they keep encroaching on Syrian territory further and further in. So it makes me wonder as well, like what the goal is to sort of keep it, in the end. And if you don't have a solid, stable government, then you just tend to that land, and it just becomes a buffer zone in the end, perhaps.
Some observers that I follow, people that have familiarity with that whole region and who very often speak and read the newspapers, Hebrew, that the goal is what they're calling a greater Israel, and basically to create a large Jewish state that is going to be Jewish, and get the Palestinians out and take over those areas of Syria, Lebanon, even perhaps Jordan that are adjoining. And I mean, they believe that the West Bank was called Judea and Samaria in the biblical times, so they can trace their designs on that going back and say, well, this was once part of Israel.
Even the police cars say it. They say Judea and Samaria police on the side of the cars. Yes, in that part over there, just in like East Jerusalem, and that going out toward the desert. There's a part you can see just past the Hebrew University. You can actually look out into the desert and just see the sand, and go, out there like that.
You, on your last trip, when you came on, you were describing an incident that you had. You did go down to Gaza, and you were very close to the border. And you had an incident that I'd like you to relate again involving the IDF forces. You had press credentials, and you went down there. And tell us again what happened.
It was this, after the first, I mentioned the first time there was a rocket attack had come in, and I was out on the beach. I had just gotten there. I was trying to find a lodging for the night down there, and because he couldn't do it online or anything beforehand. So that night I went back after I got settled in. I went down again to go just to observe things and maybe photograph the rockets and that coming in at night as it was getting darker. So I went down there, and I was going down the road, and I got to almost the end part to where you could drive before they had the security checkpoint. So it was a gas station. It was like one of ours, like a gas station convenience store. And I parked in there because it seemed relatively safe. There was a roadway. It was dark. I had good visibility to the south. And I had my gear, and I put on the flak jacket and with the press sign on it and all of that, and I took that. I took the helmet, and I had that because if something does land and it explodes, the first time I didn't have that with me. I had it in the trunk of the car, so I was just out exposed on the beach. But I figured, well, I better take it with me this time, so I did. And I was walking away, and some guys asked me to take their picture. They started like
some guys, you mean
IDF
guys. Forces? Okay.
Yeah, some IDF
military.
forces were like kind of horsing around in a way, and they asked me to take their picture. And I said, I can't do that. I'm not going to take a picture of the idea. Like, oh no, we'll cover our faces. We'll pull up like these balaclava thing. We'll cover ourselves up. And I'm like, well, why do you have to do that? He said, because I killed an Arab, and he killed an Arab, and they were all pumped up, like really, 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 really amped up. So I said, it's not a good idea anyway. And I started to like walk away, and then there was a commotion started with them, and so more people got involved. The higher ranking people came in, and then the guy who wanted me to do who wanted me to take the photo starts like interrogating me with there was a girl, IDF MP, Lily. She had a British accent. Her parents were British, and she was living there. She came over and sort of took the lead on the security of the situation. And then he started interrogating me. Every fourth question, where are you from? Where are you this? You seem nervous. Why are you nervous? Why are you that? All of this stuff. And then Lily asked me she said, he wants to see inside your bag, because he spoke to her in Hebrew. He said, he wants to see inside your bag. He thinks you have a weapon. So I opened my bags, my camera lens, and all that. So, but the biggest issue was I could have been thrown out of the country if I had a problem with that. I could have been deported, and my assignment would have been over, just like that.
Well,
So
it could have gone the other way too. If you took their picture, there's a prohibition against that. You may not have gone directly to the
I don't think
deportation.
So. No, because I was literally on the border. I was in Mafkim, like only about 4.5 5 miles from the Gaza border, and you could hear all the sounds of war going on. You could hear the machine gun fire and the drones flying overhead, the helicopter, all that stuff was going on at the time. So yeah, they really, it was like the Wild West at that point down there. So anything could have happened, but they were, I didn't like their tone, actually, and I had another run-in with the IDF in the Old City the day I interviewed the Latin Patriarch. So while I do enjoy going to the country and visiting the natural beauty of it and the Christian sites, the historic sites, there have been downsides for me that, as a journalist, I've experienced that most people wouldn't. But by virtue of what I do, I was pulled aside in the Old City and actually put up against a building and had, a a squad of 8 people around me demanding to see all my stuff. Yeah. So that was a little nerve-wracking. Then I got followed after that, after leaving the Damascus Gate and walking back to my hotel. But that's not something the average person would encounter, I don't believe.
Well, if they're probably the average person wouldn't go down to the border of Gaza when there's fighting going on.
No, so that's why I say that, you know, for me, when I bring my children, when I advocate for people to go to Jerusalem, to go to Tel Aviv, you know, I mean, some of these wars can last months, if not years on end. So what does one do? Do you not go and see Bethlehem to go? I mean, that's been an incredible experience for me. I mean,
tourism is down there as well.
And tourism is down everywhere. They're really, really hurting in Bethlehem. All of those, the Palestinians already have it bad. They make only about a quarter of what's made on the other side. I think I told you the story last time. There was a college-aged girl, I think she was about to graduate, very well spoken, spoke English better than most Americans do. I think her father had worked for USAID, and you see that's an agency. She had grown up in Canada for 13 years, but yet being an educated person, having a good job and everything there, but wanted more out of life, she still couldn't go into Israel proper. Like, she couldn't go into Jerusalem. For her mother needed eye treatment at the hospital, so they only had 4 passes a year, or she did. But you know, so they are heavily restricted. So that's, you know, what the downside of it is when you see that, when you see average people, you know, suffering because of, you know, the sins of others, and you know, and that's kind of tough to see, especially, you know, when we go, Christians will go there, and they may not have an understanding of that. A lot of the Palestinians are Christian among themselves, too. So and you know, down the line, they might be forced out. Christians might not be desired to be in the by some people who are extremely ultra-nationalist people. They don't want that either. I was there in 2015, and someone firebombed the Church of the Loaves and Fishes up in the Galilee region. In the middle of the night, a monk almost died of smoke inhalation in there, and it was someone, I think. You know, it was an Israeli. It was an ultra-nationalist Israeli who they don't want the Christian influence there either. That doesn't speak for all Israel, but the same thing applies. You know, there are some factions within the Israeli culture that don't tolerate any other religions as well.
We have about 2.5 minutes left, and I did want to talk to you about an interview I saw. There was the spokeswoman for I believe it was the Ministry of Defense in Israel, was on a press conference, and one of the reporters began to press her on how many nuclear weapons Israel had. And she kept pressing, and the spokeswoman got extremely agitated, and all she kept repeating over and over again is, Iran must not have a nuclear weapon. Our Secretary of Defense repeated that when he was interviewed, I think last Sunday or the Sunday before. He kept saying that. The question I have is, it's pretty widely known that Israel has between 250 and 300 nuclear warheads. And the question would be, they are not a signatory to any treaties or any restrictions. My understanding is there is something in place called the Samson Protocol, which is, if Israel believes its existence is threatened, all bets are off. They will launch nuclear war. That's a pretty grave situation, and I guess Baby Netanyahu wanted to get President Trump aboard with an invasion or some attack on Iran, which he changed his mind on because of primarily, I guess, Tulsi Gabbard and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth came around and said, no, we don't want to do this. When you were there, did you get a sense that people want to go to war with Iran? Or was it something that wasn't really discussed?
No, well, on a previous visit, going by the town of...
Got 30 seconds.
By the town of Jericho, which is the world's oldest city. That's another fascinating thing, but that's in the West Bank, 5,000 years old. But near there's a place where they have some, I was told, you know, they mentioned that's known that, you know, Israel has the capability to launch some of those things from there. But they can achieve conventionally what they could, I think, with a nuclear weapon. I don't think they would need to
be threatened.
Right. They could use that conventionally because they've already taken out in the last round of strikes on Iran. They took out a lot of their air defenses. So I think they can achieve just with 2,000-pound bombs that we've delivered to Israel recently. There was a couple of months ago we delivered a load of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, which are being stored there. Those could be used for such an attack. They don't really need to use nuclear weapons because, well, Iran has 150,000 weapons trained on Israel, and if they unleash them all, you saw last time on how ineffective Iron Dome was against multiple warheads. That's why the U.S. had to get involved with its planes and to help shoot some of these things out of the sky. So I think that would just make them the pariah of the world if they ever did that, to launch a nuclear weapon.
We certainly have appreciated your insights, and we want to wish you a safe journey to the Conclave, and perhaps when you come back later on in the summer, when things settle down a bit for you, we'd like to have you come back, or maybe in the fall, and we can talk about the new bishop. Maybe you could get the new bishop to come on.
He probably would. I'll actually talk to him about that this weekend.
Okay.
Thank
Tell him, yeah, we'd love to have him after he gets familiarized and settled in.
Yes.
That would be a great interview, and we really appreciate your time and the fact that you share your experiences with us.
Well, thank you, Rich. I really appreciate all that you do as well for the people of Rhode Island for a long time.
Thank you.
For 30 years.
And I want to thank the audience for listening, and please stay tuned for future editions of State of the State.